Well, he's our CBS News chief White House correspondent and host of the Takeout podcast. And now Major Garrett can add parliamentary witness to his resume. Major gave evidence today before the House of Commons Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee. UK lawmakers questioned U.S.-based tech companies over the phenomenon of fake news. This was the first time a House of Commons committee broadcast a hearing from outside the UK. Here's some of what he told the members of Parliament.
I think actors have long had motives to see if they could disturb or influence the American political process. The means is different, and the means, I believe, and I have a lot of conversations because I spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill and at the White House with political actors now. And we've started having this conversation because I try to remind them, you know, we've given them the means by which to fulfill their motives. By being so archly partisan against one another, we have created, I believe, in our dialogue in the last 10 years in this very country, a much wider opportunity for either fake news or propaganda or some things that divide us still more to have traction. Our own political discourse has created an opening that I don't believe existed before. And I think one of the reckonings our own political system has to come to is the way we talk about ourselves and the way we speak about differences of opinion. Point one. Point two, I think we have to at least acknowledge the possibility that there will be behavioral adaptations to all the things we're talking about. And I use my three children as an example, 22, 21, and 17. All three, in varying degrees, have grown up in this telephone, digital world. They are already just demonstrating signs of exhaustion, psychologically and otherwise. And I believe that there is a very real possibility that as those who grew up with this adapt differently, they will begin to send signals to Google, Facebook, and others about what they do believe is credible and is not credible. And that possibility of them changing, quite separate from any regulatory regime anyone ever might create, gives me some sense of optimism that we are all collectively, but especially the younger generation, experience this and know no other reality. But I believe there is a reckoning coming about the underlying basis of shared news, which is all your third-party verifiers you trust. That trust being reanalyzed and being maybe redirected in other ways. I'm optimistic about that. Perhaps that is.
Major Garrett is at the White House. Major, fascinating to hear your testimony there. You framed your testimony to this House of Commons committee around two questions. Explain the significance of those two questions.
Well, there was an investigation done for 7 hours today at George Washington University. My panel was the last, so it was the 7th hour. And essentially the questions posed by the committee to me and others was, what is the danger of fake news, and what is the atmosphere in which election meddling is either carried out or either weaponized or more effective, slightly more effective, in this saturated social media culture? Two separate questions, a lot to grapple with. My answer that we just ran there in part was an imperfect answer, to be sure, but I really do believe there is something that our political system has created with the deeply divided partisan nature of it and the way in which we have talked about each other over the last decade that did create an unusual and exploitable opening for bad actors, using all sorts of various means on social media to inject propagandized or intentionally fake stories that get passed around because they verify one particular point of view and then become kind of an alternate reality. My other point was, I just think that all the generalized concerns we have in the media about all of these topics must acknowledge the very real possibility of behavioral change. People changing their own behavior in relationship to the news they consume, how they consume it, and what they believe. And one of the great dangers, I think, of this entire debate is assuming that everything is frozen or that everything will be linear and all behavior will flow in a certain direction because it has for the last 2 or 3 years. As I said at the end of my answer, which we didn't have a time for, and I certainly understand that, if anything has been taught to us in the media world for sure in the last decade is that nothing is linear and everything changes. And I think the possibility of consumers changing their own behavior, changing what they consider to be valid or invalid, and looking for, as opposed to stories to click on temporarily, just for a second or two, building relationships with trusted news organizations is a real opportunity and a real opening for everyone involved in journalism. And that was one of the more optimistic appraisals I left with the committee. This is a moment of opportunity.
I think you're right about that, Major.